Hi, and welcome to the And One Podcast. I'm your host, Alex West, and today I'm joined by my guest, Josh Cornelissen. Josh, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. Loving the playoffs.
Yeah, it has been good. Round one was interesting. Round two has not been as interesting, I think, with a little bit less competitive, but still a lot to talk about, and I think that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about the playoffs, and then we're going to talk about coaching searches as well, because I know you have feelings as a beat writer for the Milwaukee Bucks. You have feelings on these coaching searches, so let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, there are 4 playoff series in progress with a combined 2 wins by the team that are down, with both series in the West being 3-1, with the Warriors and the Rockets leading, and then both series in the East being 3-0 with the Celtics and the Cavs. Do you want to start with any one of those in particular, Josh?
Well, we can start with the game we saw most recently, Houston Utah last night, where Houston kind of really put its imprint and looked to be taking control of that series.
They did. I think they played particularly well, coming up with a 100-87 win in which they led wire to wire to take a 3-1 lead. I think that Utah went in with the idea that they wanted to get a split in Houston, which they did do. And then they managed to drop the next 2 at home, which is unfortunate. And so I think this series is pretty much at a close, but I think there's a lot to learn in this series. I will be interested to hear what you have to say about it, but I have a strange thought, and maybe we'll start here. Did you notice that there was a little bit of a, I don't want to say beef, but just a little bit of a raw spot between Chris Paul and James Harden? And I'm not trying to start anything. I mean, I know we have thousands and thousands of listeners who are all listening right now. But it did seem to me that there was a little bit of something between those two last night.
Yeah, I think you have 2 players who are used to running their own team, in James Harden and Chris Paul. They've both done that. Harden for the past 4 seasons or so with Houston, Chris Paul for pretty much his entire career. And now they're, figuring out how to coexist as, co-pilots together. And James Harden has kind of still been his team, right? He's been the MVP candidate, the presumptive winner of that. Chris Paul missed a lot of time, so it took him longer to kind of integrate. And they've been saying the right things all year, that it's, James Harden's team. But in the playoffs, everything, you increase the pressure, things get tougher. And I think you have 2 guys who maybe aren't always playing the way the other would play. And that's a good thing, because I think they each have very unique strengths. But Chris Paul wants everyone to do things his way, and James Harden doesn't do things Chris Paul's way all the time, and maybe most of the time. And I think that just increases the friction. And when they're winning, usually that doesn't come out. And so they've been winning all year, and that hasn't come out. But Utah, even as they've gone down 3-1, are pushing against the Rockets in a lot of different ways and making Houston really fight for points on offense. And so I think that could be increasing the friction to the point where you're starting to see some of that relationship fray. And that probably won't matter this series, but if it continues to fray, then you have issues, whether it's next series against the Warriors or a possible question of whether Chris Paul is going to commit long term.
Yeah, those were the kind of the questions that I wanted to open up with talking about this series. And I do want to get back and talk about Utah, because they have been incredibly impressive for a team that lost their best player in free agency, to go from a team led by Gordon Hayward to Rudy Gobert's team early in the year, and then to Donovan Mitchell's team, or however, naming it, I guess, sort of doesn't really matter in this regard of whose team it is. But the rise of Donovan Mitchell is definitely worth talking about. But this Rockets storyline was just something I couldn't ignore. It was, and like you said, these are 2 guys who have led their own teams. They have done their own things. Maybe they don't necessarily exactly agree with how to run the team. But I think that when the playoffs start, and we've seen this with Chris Paul before, who has been a great performer, particularly if you go back to that 7-game series with the Spurs a couple of years ago. But he tends to sort of rub his teammates the wrong way, and I think we saw that with Blake Griffin in particular, and we all know how that ended. Do you think this is something that's going to be exacerbated if they end up down 0-2? I mean, if they split with Golden State, for example, let's just say that they're going to go through the Western Conference Finals. Like, how big do you think this thing becomes? This little tiff becomes?
Well, Chris Paul knows that he can take advantage of that open space that most defenses are providing in the mid-range. And so when teams are running the Rockets off the three-point line, like Utah's been working hard to do, that leaves space in the mid-range. Now, that's not James Harden's spot, but it is Chris Paul's. And so I bet Paul is looking at it going, look, there's space. I can create efficient offense. Let me be the primary guy right now while they're working so hard to deny Harden the ball. And if you watch the Jazz, I mean, they're crowding up on him. They're forcing him to go right where he's less comfortable. And Harden still scored quite frequently, but they're making it harder. And Paul probably goes, look, I've got the mismatch right now. Let me have the ball. Let me run this. And that's not really how Harden has ever done things in Houston. The last time there was a guy demanding touches in Houston, that was Dwight Howard, and that didn't end well. So I absolutely think that this relationship could continue to fray. And look, what are the narratives from the Rockets right now? You have that their defense is playing really well, that Clint Capella is a beast, and that James Harden deserves the MVP. Nobody's going, yeah, Chris Paul's amazing. Everybody's going, man, there's Chris Paul trying to draw fouls again. And he's not, deaf to those narratives. So I bet he wants the ball. He wants to prove that he can be a guy to lead a team. And it's harder to be second fiddle when Harden's having to fight harder to score.
And I think it's interesting that was what we were going to talk about going into this season. I remember early on, the discussion was right after the trade took place as well. Can you have two ball handlers? Can you have two guys that run the offense? Can these two coexist? And I think we put a lot of that to bed early on in the season, but I feel like it may be time to sort of take that back out and re-examine it, because things that happen in the regular season are all well and good, but they're never indicative of what a team's going to be when the chips are down. And I think with the Houston Rockets right now, the chips aren't quite down, but you can certainly see where they're going to have to push all of it into the middle when they play the Golden State Warriors. So getting a little bit of this early action from these two it has added a little bit of intrigue to this series, which otherwise has been all right for me. I would have loved to have come out of this 2-2. This trip to this trip to Utah, I would love for it to come out of it 2-2. But let's flip over and talk about the Utah Jazz for a second. This is a young team. They have sort of been reborn with the drafting of Donovan Mitchell. They traded up to take him. And last night, he scored 25 points. He has just been consistent. He has been spectacular. And he has just been one of the most amazing rookies in a class of what seems to be amazing rookies. And I just can't speak highly enough of Donovan Mitchell and what he has done for that team. But what is your overall perspective on this Utah Jazz team?
I think that Utah fans overall should be really encouraged by the Jazz. Now, sure, it looks like they're on their way out in the second round, but that's probably playing over their head anyway. And if you look at where they were a couple months in the season, well, that's a miracle because there's a slim shot they're going to make the playoffs at all. And go back to, how about July, when it looked like the Jazz had just overpaid for a doughy white guy from Australia trying to get Hayward to stick around, and now they were just stuck in a rut. And then all of a sudden Donovan Mitchell explodes onto the scene, and you realize that doughy white guy is actually one of the best forwards in the league somehow in Joe Ingles, and they've got a real team here. Now, there's decisions they have to make, of course. They've got Dante Exum hitting restricted free agency, Derek Favors hitting unrestricted free agency. So if you're looking past this series already, there's decisions to be made this summer. But what you've seen in this series is that even against the league's best competition, these guys aren't rolling over. I mean, they won a game. They were in this one late. They got it within 7 before the Rockets kind of pushed it back wide open. And I think Donovan Mitchell has been incredible. And he hasn't looked as incredible the last couple games, but the Rockets are selling out to stop a rookie. And that tells you just how good he has been. And even when they did that, I mean, P.J. Tucker is one of their better defenders, and Mitchell pulled the same spin move on him twice in a row for layups. Like, Tucker just couldn't figure it out because Mitchell just has all of these unique tricks in his bag that really no one else is doing. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were saying that Mitchell already has the best scoop shot in the league. And it's true. I mean, he extends his arm like at waist level with the ball and then just kind of brings it up, whether he's scooping it up in front of the hoop or extending to hit that layup as he's reaching past the defender. And it's pretty much unblockable. And it's just incredible how he's developed this offensive skill set in just his first year.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with you. That scoop shot, it does remind me a little bit of like a YMCA league, men's league kind of thing. You would see people do that all the time. You don't see it as much as an NBA level, but it certainly is a tool that he has utilized very efficiently in his repertoire. But the thing about Mitchell that impresses me the most is his command of the game. This is a young guy. I mean, we've obviously sung his praises, a rookie and all that. But he comes in, he runs the offense. And I think that there was a question about that when he came out of Louisville. I mean, he was a little bit of a two guard, a little bit of a combo guard. There were all these questions last year about what position Donovan Mitchell played. And first of all, we're going to look back at this draft, and that's going to be one of the big misses. That's going to be the Giannis or whatever, even though he ended up going 13, I think. I just sort of said that through my hat because I think Kennard went 12.
Yep,
but when you look back and you think, like, they drafted Malik Monk got drafted. Now, jury's probably still out on him, but I can't imagine him being much more effective than what Mitchell's been. Luke Kennard got drafted by the Pistons, and then Donovan Mitchell fell all the way to 13. And we all know that talent evaluation is difficult. I mean, you know, you've worked with the draft. I've worked with the draft. We all know that identifying fit, identifying personality, all these things are super important to finding a player's the way he's going to mesh with your existing team. But Donovan Mitchell has gone above and beyond, I think, what anybody expected, maybe except for Donovan Mitchell. He might be the only one that would have expected him to be playing at this level this early.
Yeah, I think that's true. And whenever you're talking about the draft, you know, Ben Falk's written about this, about how you have to anticipate that you're going to be wrong, that you don't have all the information, that you're not, you know, omniscient when it comes to evaluating these prospects. And so you should load up on as much draft capital, give yourself as many bites of the apple. That was really the whole theory of the process was let's tank, let's get as many high picks so that some of them will hit. And that's what happened. Jahlil Okafor did not hit. Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons did. But then you have Utah who decided, hey, we're sitting back here with pick 24, and we see our guy Donovan Mitchell, and we think he's going to be good. Now, they probably didn't know he was going to be this good this quick, right. But they identified that Mitchell was their guy, and so they moved up and got him. And they didn't, you know, just try to hoard their assets, but they went after their guy, and it worked for them. And so I think that there obviously is a balance there, and they trusted their evaluation, and it worked out. And I think you really have to look at this Utah team and see not only is their coaching staff excellent at developing these guys, but they have been nailing the draft, and it's been really cool. Dante Exum has taken a while, but he's really been playing well in the playoffs. Evaluation to get a guy like Joe Ingles, you know, to develop Rudy Gobert the way that they have, and to find him at the back end of the first round. I just think the way that they have gone after players, they've seen a lot of success. And even when they don't have the ability to sign marquee free agents, and they don't really have the ability to keep them here, as you see with Hayward, they've still been able to sustain success because they have a smart organization that's making smart decisions. And Mitchell is like the highest example of that. But I think it's just indicative of how this organization, top to bottom, is just winning at basketball.
Yeah, I totally agree. They have developed their guys, and I think talent development is one of the most underrated skills that an organization can have. When you look at teams like San Antonio and Golden State, who have spent the past decade developing their own talent. Now, San Antonio's probably fallen off a little bit with the Kawhi Leonard injury, missing a year, but these are teams that take advantage of the rookie salary structure, because if you can develop your guy in your first 7 years, or in his first 4 years, in his first 7 years, what you have is a basically rent-controlled player who develops into sometimes even an all-star level, MVP level when it comes to Steph Curry, guy on a reasonable contract. And that allows you to add the Kevin Durants and the LaMarcus Aldridges, because what you've done is put a great team on the floor and managed to save a lot of cap. But I want to talk about this draft class in particular. A lot of people going into 2017 thought it was going to be really special. I don't think that we really knew how special. Now, I guess you can't really include Ben Simmons in there, but I do want to talk about him a little bit. When you've got Simmons, you've got Tatum, and you've got Mitchell all playing tremendous minutes here in the conference semifinals, this is a class that we're going to be talking about for a long, long time.
I completely agree. I think it's incredible. You have this idea that rookies are not going to contribute on defense in their rookie season, and they're not going to be able to help you win playoff games. And that's, I mean, maybe it hasn't been like proven false overall, but this year it's absolutely not the case. I mean, it really is incredible that you have 3 elite rookies who are contributing at such a high level. Now, Ben Simmons obviously was drafted in 2016, not 2017, but even as a first-year player, he's been incredible, led the 76ers to 52 wins. But Jason Tatum, you had him picked 3rd overall, and many draft pundits had him further down. They looked, he's not going to be a good defender. He can't shoot from deep. He's just going to be the next coming of Carmelo Anthony. Well, Carmelo Anthony was pretty darn good for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that all too quickly. But 2, Tatum has been those things. He has been a good team defender, and he has been a sharpshooter from deep. Whether that's going to continue throughout his whole career, we don't know. But Tatum has been awesome. And not to toot my own horn, because I got a lot of them wrong. I had Donovan Mitchell at like 17th. So let's just make that said. I'm obviously not good at it. I had Tatum number 2, and I toyed with him number 1 because of what his positional spot. I said that poorly, but he's a forward, and he can play the 3 and the 4, and that's what you need in this league more than you need point guards, where you had guys like Dennis Smith and Lonzo Ball and Markelle Fultz in the mix there. And I thought Tatum would fit really well on the wing, and I thought in Boston he was an excellent fit. In Philly, if they had just kept the pick and taken Tatum, that would have been an excellent fit. So I think that you're seeing how much a wing player, a forward, can really impact the game, oftentimes more than a guard. And Tatum has been incredible. And Boston just has an embarrassment of riches at this point.
Yeah, we're going to definitely talk about the Celtics and the Sixers here in a few minutes, but you're totally correct that they have developed Tatum in such a way that he has become an impact player from day one. Al Horford has been playing tremendously well, but it's not crazy to think that Jason Tatum's been the best player in this series as a rookie. As a 20-year-old, he has played incredibly. But I think you said this, and I think that it's true. I mean, obviously Ben Simmons drafted in 16, but I think that for as long as these guys are in the league, particularly these 3 guys in Tatum, Simmons, and Mitchell, I think they're going to sort of be tied together because of this rookie season, this rookie of the year debate. I think as long as we talk about those guys, it's going to be in a group, and we'll always remember this as like that 03 class. So while Simmons was a 16 draftee, I think that he'll probably sort of be remembered with this 17 group more than the 16 group. But anyway, there's one thing I want to talk about more about this Rockets and Jazz series before we move on, and it's just a tiny little thing. I feel like maybe Rudy Gobert's been played off the court sometimes. Clint Capella's obviously a beast. We touched on that. He adds this great vertical spacing to teams. I mean, to his offensive lineup. But the one thing about Rudy Gobert is that he has been a switchable defender. He's been a guy who could guard on the perimeter. He is obviously a great rim protector with his length. But it feels to me that Chris Paul and James Harden have been hunting out switches that involved Rudy Gobert and sort of played him off the court. Now, last night he didn't have a tremendous impact in the game, and I was sort of watching through this morning, and I reflected on this. He had 11 points and 10 rebounds, but they were very quiet. I didn't feel like he had a huge impact on the game, and for a player who is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in perpetuity, I have to believe for the next few years, it's very strange to see him sort of not be able to put his imprint on the game. And maybe that's sort of an indictment on the change in the center position. Maybe that's an indictment on the way the Houston Rockets play basketball, and they can sort of take advantage of Rudy Gobert. But after the impact he had in round 1, it feels like in round 2 he hasn't had nearly the impact that we would expect from a Defensive Player of the Year.
I think that's a really fascinating point to focus in on, because Gobert was incredible and all season long. The numbers back it up. His impact as a defender was better than James Harden's impact as an offensive player throughout the league. If you look at, elevating his team above league average. And so you look at that and you look at how they, upset the Thunder and how Gobert just kind of shut down the Oklahoma City offense for long stretches. And then he's not had that impact in this series. And I think that there's two factors there. So one of them is just how Houston plays offense. Just they've spacing the floor. They've got guys all the way out to the 3-point line. And so Gobert has to cover incredible amounts of space. And he's better at that than pretty much any other big man in the entire league. But it's still difficult for a rim protector to do because the Rockets are just going to bomb away from three. So does he close out to try to stop that, or does he stay around the rim? And he certainly had some great moments. I mean, there's back in game 2, he was able to stop penetration at the rim and then realized that the guy he now had to cover was Eric Gordon out on the 3-point line, and he sprinted out and contested that shot and forced a miss. It was an incredible play, and a 7-footer doesn't make that play. But I think that what compounds it then is not only is Houston playing 4 and 5 out, but the center they've got in there is Clint Capella, and Capella has been huge, not only this season making a jump, but this series he has been incredible. I think that that's what makes this work. There are other teams that, bomb away from three and try to space the floor around rim protecting centers, but they don't have a guy who can make Gobert. He has to, guard the pick and roll hard because Capella sets a crushing screen and then is just sprinting to the rim. And he has to somehow pick between stopping Harden or stopping stopping Capella. If he commits to staying back to make sure Capella can't get the lob, then Harden's going to hit that floater. If he steps up to Harden even the slightest bit, Harden is snaking these bounce passes or these lobs right to Capella. And all season long, everybody talked about if Harden and Chris Paul and Capella were all healthy, those lineups were this and a low number, 40-2 or 50-1 or whatever it was. And I always thought that felt like a made-up stat, like, Alex, did you know the Celtics with Gordon Hayward, when Hayward started, were on track for the worst record in NBA history? 0-82. But, that record was apparently real. That's like saying, the Warriors with or without Curry. Not saying Capella's as good as Curry, but, the Warriors, when all their stars are together, are almost unstoppable. And that seems to be the case with the Rockets as well. And that doesn't mean they don't have weaknesses, but Clint Capella is a perfect fit for what the Rockets are doing. And while he's that perfect fit, he's not demanding touches. It's like the best of Amari Stoudemire on offense without the worst and with the elite defense. And so Mike D'Antoni's offense is like working at an elite level. And so I know I just talked a ton there, but I think that the answer to why Rudy Gobert has not been as effective is both the scheme and how well Clint Capella has been playing.
Yeah, I think that you're probably right on that regard, that a lot of it has to do with how the Rockets just play basketball, and they can sort of play centers off the court. They did it with Steven Adams, and Steven Adams is an impeccable perimeter defender, but they kind of played him off the court in games this regular season. And I just feel like maybe that it's not necessarily a slight against Gobert. I don't know how you correct it, because obviously you want to play – Utah's best lineups are going to involve Rudy Gobert. And Utah's best lineups are going to be slow-paced, and they're going to be grinded out, and they're going to work and get good shots, and they're incredibly patient. But all of that seems to be counteracted by how the Rockets play. And I think that this is a team that's in the Utah Jazz is going to be around for a while. So I will be interested how Quinn Snyder and his staff sort of adjust the game. And even tomorrow night in Game 5, I'll be interested to see how it feels like they can get Gobert back in the game, get his head back on straight, and let him have at least some impact before this series is over, because I think it's very, very important to find out if he can play in these series. And because if he can't, and I'm not saying that he can't, because he is an incredible defensive player, but if he can't play in this series, you sort of have to figure out what you're going to do with him, because this is the direction that basketball is going. And I feel like that's a little bit of a bigger issue than people are talking about right now, because Gobert is so important to what the Jazz do, and he has not been terribly effective this entire series. And so that's something I'm watching as we go forward. But you made an interesting point, and I feel like it's something we have to sort of get to. But you said that the Rockets are unstoppable with their big three, and the Warriors are unstoppable with their big four, and it feels like somebody's going to have to stop in these conference finals, because the Warriors are also up 3-1 with a win over the Pelicans yesterday afternoon. They won 118-92, and it seemed like to me, Josh, that this series was over, that the Warriors sort of went into New Orleans and really just beat the Pelicans pretty bad, and that sort of put a bow on it. How do you feel about this series right now?
I mean, I think that the bottom line is that the Hamptons Five is undefeated, both in in playoff series and in Steve Kerr press conferences. But I think this grouping of players, the league has not found a way to stop because they just don't have a huge weakness. If the only weakness is Andre Iguodala, one of the 2 or 3 best perimeter defenders in the league, is at least a little bit of a poor 3-point shooter. That's not a good enough weakness to beat that lineup. And I think that the Warriors can just lean on that really as much as they need to moving forward. And so we've got to see moving on if Houston has a way to combat that. But I think that you saw by starting that group and leaning on that group, the Warriors were able to go ahead and kind of finish this series off. Now they got one more game, maybe more than that. But I think that this kind of shows that they're going to be moving on. I think the key has been Kevin Durant, right? He was incredible in Game 4, dropped 38 points. And really the thing is that no matter how New Orleans guarded him, he was just hitting shots because he's tall enough. He's a fake 7-footer. He lists himself at 6'9" or whatever, but he's really like 7'1". And so it's impossible to bother his shot. Like, there was this one jumper where Drew Holiday was literally typing his password into Kevin Durant's face, and Durant just drained the jumper. ABC had a great montage of Durant like pulling up against tight defense and just drilling shot after shot over Etuan Moore, over Darius Miller, over Drew Holiday, over Solomon Hill, and even Anthony Davis, one of the few players in the league who can match Durant's length. He played him tight on the 3-point line, and Durant just drained it right in his face. I think that something that New Orleans doesn't really have an option to do is to deny Durant deny Durant before he gets the ball. Tony Allen was always excellent at this. If you fight Durant and push him off his spots and deny him the ball in every single possession, he gets irritated, he gets tired, and suddenly those shots don't go in as much. But the problem is the league has precious few of those players. And the Warriors have to decide, okay, if we have one of these, are we putting them on Durant or Curry or Klay Thompson, right? So the Warriors force all of these impossible options. So I think that Kevin Durant, when you have all the rest of the Warriors around him, is like a cheat code where I definitely don't see the Pelicans coming back against it. But I think that is what you have to ask for every other potential opponent. How are they going to stop Durant?
Yeah, that's definitely an important question because I think that one of the things that we have sort of garnered in this series is that Durant is one of the best players in the league, and I feel like we kind of got away from it particularly in the Anthony Davis hype and his well-earned hype. Let me add, Anthony Davis has been spectacular this season, but I feel like with all of these young players playing as well as they did this year, we've just forgotten how good Kevin Durant can be, and yesterday seemed like an affirmation for me that Durant is one of the I don't like doing the rankings and the who's the best player in the league, but certainly one of the most impactful players in the league because he came in, he scored 38 points, he looked absolutely unguardable, and if that's the Kevin Durant you get for the rest of the playoffs, I really just don't see a situation where Houston can stop them, Cleveland can stop them, the Dream Team can stop them, whoever it is you want to throw against them, when Kevin Durant is playing at this high of a level.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Houston obviously has added a lot of players just for this matchup in mind. Guys like Luc Richard and Mbah a Moute and PJ Tucker to try to match up against Kevin Durant. And hey, maybe it will work, but then you have to ask, okay, what happens when Clint Capella has to be out on Draymond Green at the 3-point arc? Who's going to be at the rim? Who's going to be there to catch, Cutter, Iguodala cutting on the baseline, and Klay and Curry screening for each other? It's exponentially compounding the stress on a defense. And when it really doesn't matter who you guard Kevin Durant with, it's almost like why even try? Now, of course, they should try, and of course the Warriors can lose games. And Houston has the best chance of anyone possibly in the last 2 years of actually pushing the Warriors, to a Game 7. But I just think that in the end, when you have two of the 3-4 most unguardable players in the league in Durant and Curry, it just makes things impossible. And when you turn things around the other way, all of these players can play good defense as well. And so it's not like you're going to make up for it on the other end. Anthony Davis is, possibly been the best center in the playoffs. I think that's actually an interesting question between him and Capella and Horford and Embiid. But, with him and Drew Holiday, who I think has still been excellent, and even if you say the Pelicans starting lineup is playing really well, their bench doesn't have the chops to keep up. It's just like you keep going down the list, and it's like, okay, we did this, and we did that, and we stopped this, and we stopped that, and there's 8 other reasons why suddenly you're down 15 points.
Yeah, that's what the Warriors do. They make it's like you said, like that checklist of, okay, have you closed down on Klay Thompson in catch and shoot situations? Yeah, we did that. Okay, well, can you check the roller when David West is rolling the rim? Okay, yeah, we did that. Can you check the kick out when they kick it back out to Curry? Okay, we did that. Okay, well, now they've reversed it and swung it to Kevin Durant, and he hit a 3. And so I think that it's a systematic success when you watch the Warriors play. I think there's so much that goes on behind the scenes with Steve Kerr. And I'm not the biggest Steve Kerr game day coach fan, as many Warriors fans will note. I think that some of his lineups are wonky, but one thing that I think that he does spectacularly well is he gets his players ready. They know what the next evolution of the offense is. No matter what the situation, no matter what the shot clock, they know where the next guy who's going to be open to warp the defense. And there's not obviously not a better team at warping defenses in terms of gravity, because when you have 3 of probably the best 5 3-point shooters in the game in Durant, Curry, and Thompson all on the same team, obviously your spacing is going to be a nightmare for defenses. But I think that one of the great things and one of the underrated things that Steve Kerr has done is help these players understand where their release valves are going to be. And I think that when you see this team clicking on all cylinders, as they were yesterday, and you see that ball move one extra time, you just see these shots where you're like, how is Klay Thompson open by 8 feet? And it goes back to moving without the basketball, screening off the ball, and just generally knowing how to position yourself to put the defense in these terrible, terrible positions. And New Orleans, obviously a pretty flawed roster. We knew that going in. They played really well against the Trailblazers. And the Trailblazers obviously were also a flawed roster, and we found that out, even though they finished at the 3 seed. But I think the Pelicans have played pretty well for what they are. Now they're going to have to make some big improvements, and I think this series is probably over, and I think it's probably over tomorrow night. But there is a large question with this group that is looming, and it is how can they keep Anthony Davis happy? Whether it's Alvin Gentry, whether it's general manager Dell Demps, whoever it has to be, they have one of the best players in the league. However, they're a small market, and it's kind of built on him, and their success is kind of predicated on Anthony Davis staying. And I just want to touch very briefly on what this offseason might entail for the New Orleans Pelicans.
Well, the big question has to be DeMarcus Cousins or Nico Mirotic, because I don't think that the Pelicans can keep all of them together, because you just have too many mouths to feed, too many bodies. You can't really play all 3 of them together. So they have to decide, do they want to go to spacing the floor around, an Anthony Davis pick and roll and have, a stretch 4, or do you want to go for this 2 big guy lineup that was honestly very effective, and it continued to improve over the course of the year, where Cousins and Davis would go inside and out of each other. And honestly, I think that there's value to that, because as you have teams like the Warriors, like the Rockets that are, moving away from playing traditional center as many minutes and are spacing the floor, having 2 big guys that have to be guarded by other large people, I think that that's a huge advantage if you can work it well. But you look at what the Pelicans did down the stretch here without Cousins, where they put Mirotic at the 4 and spaced the floor, and they were bombing from 3. They were running in transition. Look, running in transition is not on DeMarcus Cousins' playlist. So they look like a different team when he's out there. Not a bad team, but a different team. The problem is they can't afford to let him go for no value either. So can you do a sign and trade where you get someone else to take Cousins? I thought Sam Vecini on his podcast floated this idea of the Wizards flipping Cousins for Otto Porter. Would that be an interesting swap? Now you get another high-end talent in Washington. You get, a bruiser down low. They need front court help. And on the other hand, now, Otto Porter can fill in on the wing, where the Pelicans have always had a weakness, and they'd have another elite knockdown shooter. I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know if either team would really go for that. I don't know that Cousins' value will be that high coming off the Achilles injury, but The Pelicans have to figure out a way to not put all their eggs in the Cousins basket, because if he comes back and that Achilles just saps him and he can't be the player he once was, they can't kill their chance at contention around Davis by only committing to Cousins. But on the other hand, they can't give him up, just let him walk for nothing. And so I think I don't have the good answer here, but I think that it really is probably one of the 2 or 3 biggest questions of the offseason.
Yeah, there is no good answer to this, because Anthony Davis has been sort of vocal about not wanting to play the 5, and they brought in Emeka Okafor after the injury, and Emeka Okafor hasn't played a ton during the playoffs, maybe not at all. I can't remember him playing. So if he did, it was insignificant. But Anthony Davis has been vocal about not playing the center position. Now, you and I both know that Anthony Davis is a center, and his most effective position is center. So you kind of get caught between a rock and a hard place if you're the New Orleans Pelican organization, because ideally you would probably want to go the route where you put Davis at center, and you played with Mirotic and you put shooters around him, and you use that Cousins money to sort of supplement your wing talent. But at the same time, this is not a team that can attract free agents. This is not a team that's going to be able to bring in that top-tier talent that they need to compete. And so letting Cousins walk away for nothing is essentially a death knell for Anthony Davis's tenure in New Orleans. And so, like you said, we don't have all the answers. That's just something that I wanted to touch on and talk about, because as the offseason unfolds, that's something you got to keep an eye on, because they have to keep Davis. Honestly, they might lose the team in New Orleans if they don't keep Anthony Davis. And adding DeMarcus Cousins back into the roster coming off an Achilles injury is obviously fraught with peril. So this is a team that is not in a great space, despite having their best season with Anthony Davis that we can possibly remember.
Yeah, I think New Orleans has to be encouraged by the season for sure. Even with the Cousins injury, I mean, you have how well Holiday's played after signing that contract. You have how well Rondo's played in the playoffs. Davis has made another leap. You see a lot of value in the moves that they've made. And, it's not like they gave up the farm for Cousins anyway. So I think they've made a lot of good moves on the margins. E'Twaun Moore has played well. I think Ian Clark has been a fine signing. Darius Miller was a good find. So I just think it's almost like Dell Demps has recovered from a couple of years of just making bad move after bad move to make really good moves this year. And I think the final one, trading for Nikola Mirotic, was excellent. So do you let him, continue making the moves this summer, or do you decide, hey, we need to prepare for the stretch run with Anthony Davis and make a change? I think that their run in the playoffs have probably meant that he's secure, as is Alvin Gentry, and perhaps they deserve to be. But I think it's a big question, because Anthony Davis is too good to just let him, maintain the status quo. And I think you've got to try to find a way to get him into at least the conference finals. That being said, that might be too lofty of a goal. I mean, when you play in a conference with the Golden State Warriors, it could just be that this is their ceiling, that this is just the level they're going to play at. And the Warriors are like the Cavs have been out east, or LeBron James at least for the last 7-8 years, and that this is just how things are going to go, and that Anthony Davis hopefully will just be okay with maintaining this level.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting question as we go forward. Sorry, there's some construction going on next door to us. If you're hearing any background noise, that's what's going on. Josh and I had to talk about it pre-show. But anyway, let's switch over and talk about the East a little bit. I mean, tons of great questions in the West, but there are a lot of things going on in the Eastern Conference that are incredibly entertaining as well. And we have to start with both Eastern Conference teams, both Eastern Conference matchups play tonight, and they're both 3-0. Let's start with the Cavaliers. Let's talk about the Cavaliers and the Raptors. This has been a series where LeBron, we're talking about affirmation about who's the best player on the planet, and I think that LeBron has put his stamp on that lofty ceiling, that he is still the reigning best player on the planet. And if anything, that bank shot with his legs turned sideways with 5 seconds left on the clock is just a seal for that. What do you really like about this series? I mean, is there anything to really talk about? Cleveland's played a little bit better defense. I don't know what the storyline is, because the thing that looms the largest to me is look how good LeBron James is.
LeBron has been incredible, which is crazy to think. This is his 15th year. He has logged more minutes than only a handful of players in NBA history, and he's still playing at such an elite level. NBA Math has their total points added metric, and this morning they just updated us on through this weekend's games what players have added the most points for their team, and LeBron James not only leads the league, which is probably not surprising, but he has added 129 points over the postseason thus far. So that's 10 games. The next highest player is James Harden at 76. So he has almost doubled any other player's output this playoffs, and he's had to, because until the last couple games his supporting cast has not been there, and he has had to bring everything, and it's been superhuman performance after superhuman performance to kind of push the Cavaliers to victory. And look, the numbers suggest that this team isn't any good. I mean, they have their point differential for the playoffs is 10th. There's only 8 teams in this round, which means 2 teams that didn't win in the first round, the Pacers, who significantly outperformed Cleveland even as they lost, and the Bucks both had better point differentials. So the Cavaliers, all the metrics are suggesting this Cavaliers team still isn't any good, and yet they're up 3-0 on the Toronto Raptors. So really it has all started and ended with LeBron James, who has been incredible again and again and again.
LeBron leading the playoffs in minutes right now, 417. The next closest is Donovan Mitchell at 377. Now, I think that's the big question for this team going forward. I'm not sure that it manifests itself against Toronto with the rest of the series. He seemingly has owned it. I'm not sure it manifests itself against the Celtics. The Sixers, if they were to come back and win, might be able to make a little bit more of this LeBron fatigue factor. But that's obviously well down the road. They'd have to win 4 straight games against the Celtics to do that. But at some point, you have to believe that all these minutes, that 417 playoff minutes across 10 games, that's 41 minutes a game. I'm pretty good at math. I can move a decimal place one time.
Nicely done.
Thank you. He's playing 41 minutes a game at age 33 in his 15th season. I mean, he hit the 50,000 minute mark last year. This is a guy who has a lot of mileage on the odometer. How long do you think this can continue, Josh? How long can he continue to play at such a high level? I mean, obviously you can't answer it because there's no track record in NBA history for this. But what's your answer to this unanswerable question?
Yeah, you're right about there being no track record. LeBron James is the NBA's career playoff leader in minutes played already. And I mean, he's passed Tim Duncan, Kareem, Kobe, Scottie Pippen, Shaq. These are the next guys on the list. And he's already outdistanced them and then some. And so there is no precedent. We don't have a roadmap for this. But look, LeBron has never had a serious injury in his entire career. So if he gets seriously injured, if this, the fatigue and the high minutes actually manifests itself in him getting hurt, that would be the first time. And so I think what's more likely to manifest itself with the high minutes, and you actually already seen it in a couple of games in the playoffs thus far, are cramps. That seems to be how LeBron is forcing his muscles to do his will and to jump and to run and to sprint and to, pivot and to do all of these things that he does that just show his elite athleticism. And he forces them to do it at high intensities for high amounts of minutes. And eventually the muscles just start to give out and they cramp. And so I think that this is probably where it could manifest itself, and that's why the Cavaliers have to be able to, at least hold water in the minutes where LeBron's off the floor, and they've actually been able to do that in the last couple of games. Game 7 against the Pacers and Game 3 against the Raptors, that have helped keep the Cavaliers in the series. I say in the series, they're up 3-0, but I mean they've kept them afloat. In the minutes where LeBron's been on the bench, and so I think that's probably. The biggest storyline has to be how LeBron's been playing and how the Raptors have no answers for him. But I think an underrated storyline for moving forward is how the supporting cast has started to step up, how guys like George Hill and Kevin Love have finally started to contribute. And if that happens, then we have to start asking the question, not just is LeBron going to make it to the conference finals again, but can anyone even stop the Cavaliers for a game on their way to the finals?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most fair thing to say is that LeBron playing at this level and then getting even 50% of what we thought his supporting cast can be is a pretty unstoppable, at least for the East, a pretty unstoppable combination. Now, I feel like it took us like 8 minutes to mention another Cavalier, and I kind of want to leave that there. I kind of want to put a button on that and say that that's well done because that's who the Cleveland Cavaliers are. I mean, obviously you saw the Saturday Night Live sketch about the other Cavaliers that they aired that was all over Twitter and all over Reddit earlier yesterday and today. But I think that's kind of what the story is it's LeBron James and friends. Let's leave that there. Let's switch gears and let's talk about the Toronto Raptors because this is very compelling, not for the rest of this season. Their season is done. They might win a game, but regardless, this series is pretty much over because LeBron James has just been absolutely dominant. And for the record, I don't think they will. I think that the series ends tonight. But the Toronto Raptors are a team that we talked about throughout the season as being different, as being constructed, as reinventing themselves, constructed in a different way. They're built on this high-powered backcourt. And I know that you had a point the other day on the Swingmen when I was listening to you where you said it's hard to sort of question what it means to build on these backcourts. Does it work? Is it successful? Toronto's going to have to sort of tangle with these questions in the offseason because obviously the DeRozan-Lowry combination is not getting you apparently even to the conference finals. It's not getting you through wherever you have to face LeBron James. And to be faced with that in a situation where you're already capped out, where you're well beyond, they have $128 million committed next year. That's a tough place to be. And what do you do going forward? I mean, I speaking of tooting our own horns, I made a funny tweet because I'm hilarious, where you just switch all the shooting guards from Washington, from Portland, and from Toronto, and you just switch them. You just turn them one to the left. And because essentially it seems like there's not really any big trade to deal for DeRozan, to deal for Lowry. I don't know, maybe Masai Ujiri, who has been phenomenal as a GM, can work some magic, but I don't know what to do, Josh.
Yeah, I think these are difficult questions, and I think that Toronto has responded by not doing anything drastic to this point. They've kind of kept the core together. They've kept their GM and their head coach, Dwayne Casey, and they've just kind of continued to make internal improvements. And I'm going to say something that probably isn't popular in the midst of Toronto, being lit on fire by LeBron James again. I don't think Toronto should do anything drastic. Ooh. They have the pieces here, I think, to continue to be a really good team. If you look at their numbers this year, they were an elite team. They were by far the best team in the Eastern Conference, and it wasn't even close. And they do not have an answer for LeBron James. That's absolutely true. But I think there's probably a really good chance that LeBron James does not play in the Eastern Conference. And even if he does, I think there's a good chance that LeBron James ends up on the other side of the bracket from Toronto next year. I mean, you have to say, 50-50. And then, is LeBron James still going to be able to roll over the Philadelphia 76ers if they add, say Paul George or another piece like that, if the Boston Celtics are all healthy, and then you've got like 6 elite, all NBA MVP type candidates, on the Celtics. So, how does, can LeBron get past those? And so I think that for Toronto, they would be tearing down a really good thing or, trying to retool or however you want to phrase it, when there's not a better option out there. Look, I think there are some moves they should make on the margins. They should trade Serge Ibaka if they can. I think that he has not been helpful, and really just removing him from the rotation would probably be about a neutral move. I think they need to re-sign Fred VanVleet. I think he's been perfect as leading their bench unit and should be relatively inexpensive. But I think this team has a lot of young pieces that will continue to improve. I mean, if you look at their team, OG Anunoby is a rookie, and he's young and he's unpolished. I think he can absolutely grow and become a better player. Pascal Siakam should continue to develop, and I think that he has the tools to be a really, really good starting player. And DeLon Wright it has been good in the playoffs, has played a key role, and I think he can continue to improve. So I think this team will keep getting better from the youth, and I think that for them to kind of muck everything up and try to force a move or get rid of a good coach when really the only problem they've had has been LeBron James the last couple of years, I think would be a mistake. And I think this team has every possibility to make not only the Eastern Conference Finals, but even the NBA Finals. And honestly, they may have this year if things had gone a little bit differently. Maybe they played LeBron in the conference finals, or even if something goes differently in game 1 and game 3, just by a hair, and they get that tip in game 1, and LeBron's shot misses in game 3 when they had all the momentum going into overtime. I think that they could be up 2-1, and that's not that unreasonable. So I think that everybody is freaking out because Toronto's down 3-0, but I think his team is really good, and I don't have a problem with them keeping it together.
I would agree with you, except for in that they're going to be in the repeater tax. They're going to be over the cap. They're going to be paying the tax for a roster that obviously can't get the job done. And I think at some point you have to change the way you think about it from, are we winning 50 games? Which I agree with you in principle that sometimes winning 50 games is a really good place to be. And you sort of hope that the breaks go a certain way, because you do have to, in some capacity, have to get a little bit lucky when it comes to winning an NBA title, that maybe you don't face this person, or maybe this team doesn't shoot well, or whatever. And there is some degree of luck, and maintaining that 50-win roster keeps you in the conversation. But when you look at that salary cap, when you look at the situation that they're dealing with, particularly, and you hit on the big one is getting rid of Serge Ibaka, because Pascal Siakam has shown this year that he is a modern NBA player. He is a bigger guy who can play the forward spot. He can help protect the rim a little bit. He can definitely defend on the perimeter. And every time you're playing Serge Ibaka, it feels like you're just taking minutes away from the better player in Pascal Siakam, because I feel like Serge Ibaka is a little bit washed up at this point. And I probably am not the first or the most prescient person to say that. But that being said, there are some tools that you're going to have to change. You're going to have to embrace a little bit more of the youth movement with Siakam, with Fred VanVleet, with DeLon Wright, however you feel about those guys. But you're going to have to get them in the game more often. And I think personally that involves moving one of the two pieces in Lowry or DeRozan. And I don't know that you can get great returns on it, but I just feel like with the cap situation being what it is, with their paying the tax, with not being able to beat LeBron, and then with secondarily the rise of Boston and Philadelphia as prevalent conference contenders over the next couple of years, you're in a pretty tight spot where I don't know that you necessarily even feel like you are in the conversation. So I think this is a really tough road to hoe for them, because there's no easy way out of it, and we're going to see the same things, I believe, in Washington and Portland as well, where you have these rosters that are built on the backs of these scoring backcourts, and it's just not getting the job done. And I don't think it's necessarily a wholesale indictment of the play style. I just feel like with these cores and these three cities in particular, you don't really have championship caliber contenders, and there's nothing you can do to just turn it around. I mean, you're not going to swap DeMar DeRozan for Giannis. You're not going to swap him for Kristaps Porzingis. And I said this the other day, I'm not quite sure how good DeMar DeRozan is, or what his price would be if they did try to move him. And I feel like you're not going to get what you feel is a good return. So I don't envy the position that they're in, is basically what I'm getting at with that, Josh.
Yeah, and I understand, and it's difficult, but let's sketch out a slightly different story here. In the series with the Cavaliers and the Pacers, let's say that LeBron goaltends Oladipo, and they call it a goaltend, and then he misses that three-pointer, which was a difficult shot. Yes, he hit it. Let's just say he missed a three-pointer. LeBron James misses one shot in the first round. Well, the Pacers close that out in 6 games. Then it's Indiana-Toronto. Toronto's got home court. You want to assume that Toronto's going to maybe – I think it's reasonable to say they could have won that series, and they probably should have. And then what are they going to – they're going to lose to the Boston backups? Maybe. I mean, Boston's been incredible, but you have to assume they would have been favored in that series. And then, look, Toronto's in the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. You're not going to shake anything up then, right? And that all goes back to something the Raptors didn't even do in the first round, which was LeBron James hitting one crazy shot. And that could have just changed the entire narrative. So I just think that Toronto has a really good thing here. And just because there's one player they can't beat doesn't mean they should destroy everything. And I know you're not saying they should destroy everything, but I just think that they've got a really good thing going here. And I don't think any trade they can make for, their moving one of their backcourt pieces is going to improve them. I think it's just changing something because you feel like something has to be changed. And I think that'll just start them on a downward trajectory. And look, I think that with Philadelphia and Boston, they're only going to get better. So I mentioned this on the Swingmen the other night. Their window is next year. I think it's really the last time they're going to have to push through to conference finals or the finals. And so I think that you can't do something that's going to shake it up and push the timetable down the road. I think you got to try to win next year. That's your only shot.
Yeah, I think that you're totally right. So maybe you just run it back one more year. I mean, they're not up against it with either DeRozan or Lowry. So maybe you do run it back one more year. I certainly see where you're coming from. Now let's talk about this Philadelphia-Boston series. Not what I thought was going to happen. Probably not what you thought was going to happen. But here we are. The Boston Celtics are up 3-0 with a chance to close out the series tonight. And I think the best Boston Celtic and the player and the person that you have to talk about the most is Brad Stevens. He has preached the next man up mentality, and it seems like every next man is as good as the man before him, despite all reason. With Terry Rozier playing, you were talking about NBA Mass TPA rankings. Terry Rozier is third in total points added. Is he third? Maybe he's fourth.
He's third.
He's third. Okay, so he's third in total points added. He has been as effective as anyone has been in the playoffs. And I don't think anybody saw that coming. I don't think that anybody outside of Terry Rozier believed he was capable of that. And Brad Stevens has put his players in a position to succeed over and over and over, and they have succeeded. And I can't speak highly enough of the job that he has done throughout this regular season, dealing with injuries, and then now throughout the playoffs, losing his best player in Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I think it's been incredible, and everybody thinks of Brad Stevens as this tactical genius, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I think what's really underrated about coaches is how they create this culture where everyone's bought in and everyone knows what's expected of them, and that when they do need to step up, that they have the confidence to do so. I mean, that's what's been so good about the San Antonio Spurs for so many years, is that when a key player misses a stretch of time, they can basically plug anyone on the roster into the starting lineup and they keep rolling. And Greg Popovich has created this culture where whoever is taking the court has the confidence that they can succeed. The Warriors, I think, have done that as well. You see a guy like Quinn Cook come off the scrap heap. He signs a 10-day contract or a 2-way contract, whichever it was, but then all of a sudden he signed a multi-year deal because he has fit so perfectly in replacing Steph Curry. And so Brad Stevens has done that better than any other coach in the Eastern Conference. And so all of these players are, you see Shane Larkin playing crunch time minutes. And it's like, oh, yeah, of course, because he is ready for this. And he's been preparing for this all year, which is just crazy to think of. But to continue talking about Brad Stevens, I'm sure you saw this, but Stephen A. Smith went off about how on that key play at the end of Game 3 where Al Horford scored the go-ahead layup, that he was the fifth option and they almost got a 5-second call. They just, oh no, we got to get it in. Let's throw it and hope Horford can catch this. That was such a ridiculous and ignorant take to have. That was a brilliant play drawn up. It forced the switch, so suddenly you had the smaller Robert Covington on Al Horford, and he could get the positioning. Now, I think there were a couple options on the play. If they didn't switch, then you had the open three-pointer in the corner. Sure, every play is going to have multiple releases, but the play was designed to clear out the far side to get Horford one-on-one in a position where nobody could double him. And he just sealed him off, caught the ball, and made the layup. And I think, I don't know if you saw this or not, but it's going around that Brad Stevens ran the same play at Butler.
In 2009, by the way.
Yeah, which is nuts. And he's been saving this whole time. But I just can't understand it. Stephen A. Smith's now going to be more involved at ESPN. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants him to be on SportsCenter at 6. That's one more reason for me to watch something else at 6. Can we just get the jump on 24/7? Like, I've had enough of Stephen A. Smith, but I think it shows that a lot of people just don't know how to evaluate how good of a coach Brad Stevens is. We don't have a good metric to say this team has gotten, 3.4 wins, above replacement from this guy and 2.5 from this guy. And, oh, yeah, they've gotten 7 wins from their coach. Like, we don't have a metric for that, but Brad Stevens is like almost demanding it. He has been incredible, and I think it's right to start with him.
I think that nothing you say about Brad Stevens is overly superlative. I think that every great thing that you can say about him is richly deserved. Now, I'm a Celtics fan, and what that means is I am a big fan of Brad Stevens, but it also means that I've watched him a lot this year, and I would say that he's probably about 10 wins over replacement, which would be an insane number for a player, and I think an even more insane number for a guy who hasn't taken a single shot all year. But what Brad Stevens has done is he's instilled this mentality of the game is long into his players. Obviously, the 22-point deficit in Game 2 where they battled back and won that game. And then it feels like the Celtics never feel like they're out of a game. No matter what the score is early on, no matter how well the other team is shooting, the Celtics have very, very few instances this season phoned it in. And I think that if you look at some of the win percentages that Sean Grandy, who works for the Celtics media coverage, tweets about this a lot, and he talks about what the probability of win percentages was, and this team they were 99% to win against the Rockets were 99% chance to win against them when Smart took those 2 charges, and there was a Mavs game earlier this year where they were 98% chance to win in the second quarter because the Celtics were down 31. And it just over and over and over, what you see is these continued instances where the team does not give up. And I think that has to be rooted in Brad Stevens because he's basically the only constant. I mean, I guess we can talk about Al Horford as well, but basically the only constant throughout the season has been Brad Stevens. And yet the Celtics continue to play at this high level. Now, I want to go back and I want to talk about this play for a second because A, you're 100% correct. That was absolutely ignorant. B, I've watched this play about 100 times now because every time I watch it, I just get one little nuance more. And I think that is probably just the display of the genius of Brad Stevens is just you get that one more thing. What happens on that play is Rozier runs off as soon as the ball is handed to Tatum. No, it's handed to Morris. I guess Morris is the inbounder. Rozier runs into the backcourt, takes his guy with him. And then when you have a 3-man action between Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Al Horford, wherein all their defenders have to switch. And that's how Covington ends up on Horford. And when you watch that play more and more, what you realize is the play was always going to Al Horford. And not only that, there were obviously other options. I don't think that they ever intended to use them because they knew it was going to work. And the post-game interview with Al Horford sort of sealed that for me when he goes, Brad's a genius, man. And because Horford said that they told him this is what the play, where the ball is going to end up. And it certainly ended up there. And obviously we know that he managed to seal and score. But watching that play, man, I can't gush enough about Brad Stevens as a Celtics fan, but also as an NBA fan who's just a huge proponent of the chess match that takes place within series and how good coaching can help you win games.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that you have just this chess match going on. And I do want to say that it's easy to say, oh, Brad Stevens has been incredible. Brett Brown has been terrible and he's been outcoached. And Brett Brown has coached just fine.
Yeah.
I mean, he's done a good job. Now, he has an imperfect roster, and he's got these young guys. And a lot of the reason they're losing is that their guys have never been in this situation before. I mean, Embiid has played, 80 games in his career? I mean, so I think that, we need to be a little careful saying Brad Stevens is incredible, thus Brett Brown is the, dirt of the earth. So I think Brown's been competent, but Brad Stevens has been something special. But that being said, Horford made that play. I mean, you still had to have a guy catch and go right up. He sealed Covington really well. He screened hard enough that they had to make the switch. I think he made that play work. And then go back down the court. And on defense, the 76ers drew up a pretty solid play where Bellinelli was going to screen Horford. And Horford fought through it, identified the pass, and at a dead sprint broke on the ball. If he doesn't get this steal, Embiid is wide open to the rim, and he gets just a fingertip on it, pokes it away, gets the steal, hits the free throws to ice the game. So that back-to-back play on offense and defense, I think, shows why Horford has been the best player for the Celtics. As good as Tatum has been, as good as Rozier has been, I think Horford has been the best player, and that probably is what has reset our expectations the most. We thought that Boston was without its two best players and that they just needed to wait another year. This wasn't their year. But look, Al Horford has been just as good as Hayward or Irving would have been. And I think that Boston absolutely can keep winning games. Now, can they beat LeBron? I don't know. But Horford has been incredible. And I don't know what Cleveland does to stop Horford. I mean, Toronto doesn't have a guy like this who is going to space the floor out. So, okay, we need a mobile big. You know, can Kevin Love guard him? Well, Kevin Love, is he going to stop him at the post? And then Horford's just going to shut Love down. I mean, I think that Horford has been incredible and has the infrastructure in place to do what he was never able to do in Atlanta, which I think is thrive as this two-way force. And I think that it's really exciting to see. And honestly, I'm really happy for a guy who has been in the playoffs literally every year since his rookie year and deserves to be highlighted in such a way.
Now, you know, obviously the most important thing to talk about with the Celtics is how Aron Baynes is now a dead-eye three-point shooter. But I do want to talk about the Sixers a little bit, because this is an interesting situation. I believe a lot of people got on the Sixers hype train, and this series is not over. I still believe that the Sixers will win tonight. I believe they might even win one more and end up taking this thing to 6. I don't believe they're out of the woods yet, and maybe that's the pessimistic fan in me that says that, but this roster is flawed. It goes. You said it. You put it perfectly. This is not a complete picture of what Ben Simmons is. This is probably not a complete picture of what Joel Embiid is, although it's a little bit better. Simmons has struggled this series, and ultimately, I'm not a Sixers fan, but if I were a Sixers fan, I would think that this is probably for the best, because it's going to light a fire under him and make him understand that he was more talented in high school. He was more talented in AAU. He was more talented at LSU despite playing with some really, truly terrible teammates. But at an NBA level where the talent disparity is not as great, it's going to require work. And I think that has been proven to Simmons in this series. I feel like he knows that while a lot of people were saying, I don't know if he needs a jump shot, but Bill Simmons of The Ringer was sort of the lead man on, well, I don't know if he needs a jump shot. I think that we've seen that Simmons has difficulty getting it going against teams that play elite defense without a jump shot. And so while this may be sort of a downtrodden moment, if they end up losing to the Celtics again, I think that the ultimate goal of rebuilding their players or building their young players up is going to be good for this franchise, because they need to lose. They need to be tempered by losing, and they need to understand what it was that caused them to lose. And in a series where you were probably the more talented team and you end up losing with two guys who are early in their NBA careers, I think ultimately what you'll have is a franchise that's better off going forward, even though it may not feel like it right now.
Yeah, so let's strip away what the Sixers did this year and winning 52 games and being so impressive and so likable. They're a team where 2 years ago they were, picking in the top 3 based on where they finished, and they, they picked in the top 3 last year as well, for that matter, and they have not been to the playoffs before. Anyone in this core, like on this team, this team's core has not been to the postseason before. And they are relying on 2 key contributors they added as buyout candidates, right? Yep. Like, what are we seeing from this team where we're like, oh yeah, they should make the finals? Like, we got really excited and they destroyed Miami, and we were like, yeah, they can do this. Boston doesn't have anyone, and and we got caught up in the excitement of what Philadelphia could be. But look, there's every reason to think this still can be a future juggernaut. The talent on this team is still staggering, and I think whether or not Ben Simmons develops an elite jump shot, I think that he can still be a really, really good player, fringe All-NBA, a perennial All-Star. And Joel Embiid can be, I think, the best player on a title team. And look, you go back to the Golden State Warriors. They won their first series together against the Nuggets, and it was an upset, and it was exciting. And then they played the Spurs, and the Spurs just sat them down. They weren't ready yet. And it took them 2 years until they won the title. So I think to say, oh, Philadelphia is showing that this team can't do it. No, Like, these are a bunch of young puppies. They played really well and got to this place. But in the end, their team, like Nate Duncan has said a lot, they're a team with really extreme strengths and really extreme weaknesses. And when you're playing a guy like Brad Stevens, it is so easy to take advantage of weaknesses. And this team just has to grow. I think Brett Brown's going to have to grow in being a playoff tactician. I think Joel Embiid's going to have to grow. I think Ben Simmons is going to have to grow, and there are pieces around they're going to develop. Markelle Fultz hopefully will continue to come back. They're going to add guys in free agency in the draft. This team is going to keep improving and keep getting better. So I think that this series can be a learning moment for them, and it's going to give them a lot of lessons that will benefit them long term.
Do you think that Joel Embiid is the better of the two players? I tend to go a little bit the other way. Maybe I was reading into what you said there a little bit much, but do you think Joel Embiid's the better of the two?
I do. I think he is. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from Simmons. They're both really good, but I think that Joel Embiid does things that are like truly unique. And I think that especially as the league trends smaller, he's the kind of guy that can really beat up teams. And I think that's why Aron Baynes has been so key, because he's been able to match up defensively with Embiid in a way I think perhaps we weren't expecting. But I mean, if you stuck him in the Western Conference, I mean, can the Warriors play the Hampton Five against Embiid? Like, would they feel comfortable doing that? Let's say in 2 years when Embiid is even that much better, and you've got elite shooters around, you got Ben Simmons running point. I mean, the Warriors will almost be scared to move against him. If the Sixers were playing Cleveland, I mean, is Kevin Love going to guard Joel Embiid? Jeff Green? I mean, so I think that what Embiid poses a true matchup problem, and his ability.
Josh, but I think we're back. I think we're going again. There we go. Okay, we're back. Anyway, yeah, I see your point there. I sort of take it a different direction in that I believe that Ben Simmons is probably the better player because of the way the league is trending. I think that the problem that you see with Rudy Gobert is he gets played off the court a little bit, and maybe I think that will become more evident in later in Joel Embiid's career, that he's not tremendously great at closing out on the perimeter, and if you can draw him away, something that Al Horford has been successful at doing, drawing him away from the rim makes him pretty ineffective as a defender. And I think that Simmons sort of has the tools to work around those things, particularly if he develops a jump shot. And I'm not saying a good one. I'm saying if he develops a jump shot at all where he can shoot even a moderate amount and he learns to shoot with the correct hand. Because you know that knowing what people's hands are is one of my talents. As a scout, I can tell you what hand a player prefers to use. But I do feel like that Simmons is more in line with what the trend of basketball is going to be, and I think he's a talented player. Although I think it's sort of an embarrassment of riches to have both, so you don't really have to choose which one you think is the better player when they both play for the Philadelphia 76ers. But let me ask you this question. What do you see as the future for this team? I mean, you don't have any inside sources that I know about. I don't have any inside sources. But if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, say you win tonight and you lose on Wednesday, how do you take this team, the way it's currently constructed, and add to it without taking away from what Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid have done to grow? How do you add to this team to make it a title contender without taking away from the mantle of whose team it is, or is that even a big issue?
I think it is a big issue. In fact, I think that when you look at the teams that are able to sustain success, it's because they put together pieces that work well together, and it empowers the talent they already have. So, for example, Miami had Dwayne Wade, and they could tell he was going to be an elite guard. And so what they did is they traded for Shaq. Not for a guy who needed the ball in his hands on the perimeter, but for an elite big man. And I think that worked for them, and they won the title in 2006, I believe, and really pushed for a couple more even while Shaq was still in his prime. But you look elsewhere, the Warriors realized they had an elite talent in Steph Curry. They had a potential wingman in Klay Thompson. And so they went ahead and traded Monte Ellis. And then when they added a guy down the road, they added Kevin Durant. They didn't go after another backcourt guy. They didn't, try to flip Klay Thompson for anyone. They looked at the talent they had. They decided that they could empower that talent, and then they looked for talented players who could complement. And so I think that when you're looking at Philadelphia, I think what you don't want to do is load up too much on more big men. I really think that Ben Simmons is able to guard on the wing. You got Dario Saric, obviously Joel Embiid at the 5. So I think that the goal needs to be to get another guy who's like more in the 2 through 4 range than a 4-5. And then secondly, I think that when you look at Ben Simmons and you look at how he's going to be best deployed, it's with the ball in his hands. And so I know this might be unpopular for some people. Maybe it is popular. I don't know. Maybe I'm on the winning side here. But I think LeBron James would not be the best fit here.
Well, I'm on your side, so.
Okay. Well, good. And I've got the guy who knows how to scout hands here. So
exactly. LeBron's right-handed, by the way.
Oh, awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. I saw that actually. That floater.
See, he's right-handed.
Right-handed. That's good. I'm glad you can dissect the play for me.
Write that down.
Yeah, I did. So I was saying that I think that LeBron James isn't necessarily the best fit here.
Yep.
I'm okay if he says, "Hey, I want to go to Philly," and Philly signs him. Like, talent wins out, and I don't think we should be scared off of that. Right. But I think if they're making targets, I think that trying to sign Paul George, I think that calling San Antonio every couple of hours to try to get Kawhi Leonard. I think that adding a guy who is not going to run, who doesn't need to run the point, and who isn't going to be best deployed as a center, I think would be a really good play for this team. So I think that that's the direction they should go. And look, if they call about Kawhi Leonard and the Spurs are like, no, we're giving him the Supermax, we're locking in, and Paul George is like, nah, man, I've been going to LA. Haven't you been listening to Magic Johnson this whole time? And so I think that if that happens, the Sixers should just be patient, right? Add a guy like Mikal Bridges or Zaire Smith in the draft, wait another year, and then you've got a number of options next year, whether that's Klay Thompson or Jimmy Butler, guys that I think, again, would maximize the talent, empower who they already have. Look, this team is young. They don't need to rush anything. It's not like there's some timer going on their cap space. They can go this year or next. And their core is really young, and I think they've got time to grow and to continue to improve. And it's not bad to be patient and to kind of wait this out.
Yeah, I think that you have all of the pieces in place, and now it's just going to be adding to it and complementing those guys. And whatever path they choose to go, that's going to be one of the most compelling storylines this offseason, is watching what the Sixers do as they use that cap space, as they, J.J. Redick comes off the books, as Amir Johnson comes off the books, whatever, how they choose to use that, if they decide that they need to upgrade over Covington, if they decide that they need to upgrade over Saric, whatever it is. I don't necessarily know that I trust Brian Colangelo, given that he's sort of no matter how you look at it. Okay, I didn't really want to get into this, but I'm going to just very briefly. No matter how you look at this, the Tatum Fultz trade was a disaster. If Markelle Fultz comes back and he is anything short of an MVP candidate, it's a disaster. And it's because people frame this the wrong way. It's not about Jason Tatum versus Markelle Fultz. It's about Jason Tatum and the Kings or the Lakers pick versus Markelle Fultz. And giving an asset up when you could have just taken Jason Tatum at 3 is absolutely the anti-process. Because you talked about Ben Falk and how he said that it's about getting more bites at the apple. Unless you believe that Markelle Fultz is going to come in and be the player that guides you to the championship or fits in perfectly with your roster, there's no reason to not just to take Tatum and then turn around next year and still have that Lakers pick or in 2 years have that Kings pick, because you can continue to add that prorated talent at a discount price. And I feel like people keep saying, well, Fultz is still going to develop. Yes, that's true. And the NBA fan in me hopes that Markelle Fultz becomes everything that we thought he could be last summer. But the truth of the matter is when you look at that trade, you have to look at the asset that Philadelphia gave up in the pick that's going to 100% be a lottery pick, either this year for the Celtics if they end up with the number 2 pick, or if they end up with the Kings pick next year. Either way, what you've done is compromise the lottery talent for a team that has not necessarily hit on all their draft picks. Obviously, they hit on Simmons, they hit on Embiid, but the misses on Michael Carter-Williams, the miss on passing up on Porzingis, taking Jahlil Okafor. Drafting is hard, and to give away another chance when you have a player in Jason Tatum who call me crazy, fits in with this roster really, really well. And to trade up to take Fultz and to compromise an asset like that, I think it is a pretty damning situation for the Sixers, but obviously one that they can probably recover from.
Yeah, I think that when you have as many assets, it's not as damning when you maybe make a small misstep. So, and I think that if you kind of look at the history of drafts, even the best guys make mistakes too. Now, that being said, I'm not saying Brian Colangelo is a best guy by any means. I don't believe that at all, actually. I think it was a mistake to kind of cut Hinkie loose before you had a chance to, see this through. I think that if they could have gotten, maybe added a guy to the front office who could focus on the PR side of things and help communicate the message to what was happening and help Hinkie maybe not talk in some of the most sharp terms that were scaring the league and were scaring fans. But look, this team was built on the assets that Hinkie collected, and Colangelo has kind of started doling those out to try to, add pieces. And so I think that, yes, while the trade was probably a mistake, it's probably not one that's going to hamstring this team. I think that Embiid and Simmons are the pieces they need to move forward. I think Fultz still has elite upside. And so I think the future is still bright, but you're right. They're going to have to use the assets they have carefully, because they used, if they had a couple of elite assets left, they used two of them on Markelle Fultz, who obviously has significant risk now, when they could have had, let's say Jason Tatum and Cameron Reddish, or, a guy like that. So from next year's draft class. So I think that Philadelphia's got to be careful that they don't become arrogant with the assets they do have and bandy them about, and then they end up not having the infrastructure behind their two top stars.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I got a little fired up about that, but that's one thing I'm pretty I have a lot of feelings about that trade because I feel
Alex,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, you look at Boston, I mean, Danny Ainge tried the same thing, except worse, when he tried to trade 4 first-round picks for Justice Winslow. So
that didn't happen.
So, I mean, everybody gets this itch to do something when you have all these assets.
Right. And I think that what we've learned across the time is you just want more. It doesn't matter where, very few instances does it matter where, when you get a LeBron James or when you get a Ben Simmons or when you get these transcendent number one picks that I think are franchise alters. That's the one instance that it matters, but that player only comes along once every 5 or 6 years, and to sort of play your way into that is a lot of luck, honestly. But then beyond that, it's just about compiling a horde of assets and then using them in the way that's most effective. Anyway, let's change gears, Josh. We only got a few minutes left, and this has gone on longer than I thought it would, but I know that we love to talk basketball, so it's not that big a deal. There's one team in particular whose coaching search that I know that you have a vested interest in following. A lot of teams, Steve Clifford is out in Charlotte, Frank Vogel's out in Orlando, Jeff Hornacek is out and replaced by David Fizdale in New York, and then J.B. Bickerstaff has taken the Memphis job. Igor Kokoskov? Yeah, there we go. And then Mike Budenholzer out in Atlanta. But the one that, honestly, I feel like we have to talk about at this moment is what's going on with the Milwaukee Bucks coaching search, because Jason Kidd obviously didn't work out. We know that. Joe Prunty, it didn't work out, or maybe he did exactly what they thought he was going to do, which was pretty much nothing. But they have one of the best young rosters in the Eastern Conference, maybe in the league, and they have a budding superstar in Giannis Antetokounmpo. This is a job that's going to be sought after, but Milwaukee still has to make a smart hire. And what are your thoughts on the Milwaukee hiring process as it's going right now?
So I think that you want to be careful and take your time. There's no rush, and especially when you have the best job, you want to take your time and make sure you get the right candidate. And so I think that when you look at the best pairings, it were either organizations or coaching candidates who were patient. If you look at Steve Kerr going to the Warriors, well, he got offered a job with the Knicks before that, but he was patient to let the Warriors search play out, and he ended up getting a much better job there. And so I think you see that guys like Mike Budenholzer were more careful to wait out the process to see if they were going to be an option for a team like Milwaukee, and maybe, we may have a job in Toronto opening up that probably looks pretty attractive too. It looks like Portland and the Clippers won't open up. So that makes Milwaukee probably the top option. And so I think they need to be patient in looking, and that's what they're doing. They are casting a wide net. The problem and we can talk about the individual candidates briefly in a second, but I think the problem is the ownership situation. Brian Windhorst was reporting that a number of these coaching candidates, they see the talent on the roster, but they're worried about the ownership because you have three owners kind of in a partnership, and there's kind of other minority owners, but three main owners, and there's a lot of friction between those owners. And so that manifested itself in their general manager search last offseason. So they let go of their longtime general manager, and they looked to hire a new one. And everybody thought there was a guy, Jeff Zanuck, I believe, who's now in Utah, that was going to take over. But one of the other owners wanted to do their own search. And their own search, they basically, cast a wide net, interviewed a bunch of people, and then went for their in-house guy because nobody could agree on a candidate. And so I think coaches are a little bit leery of like, hey, how much friction is there with this ownership group, and how might that sprinkle down to, let's say, this year doesn't go great for the coach. Are they going to have to deal with one owner supporting them and one owner not, and they're caught in the middle, and nobody wants to be, a part of that kind of a situation. So I think that's giving them some pause and kind of tells me that even though they're casting a wide net, they could still end up messing up the search.
Yeah, I'm not sure. This is a franchise that has dealt with a lot of things behind the scenes, and obviously we talked about Anthony Davis earlier. The big question is, how are they going to keep Giannis? Because he's a generational player, he's one of the top talents in the league, and he is a player that has even spoken about with various media outlets how he's very vested in the how the Bucks are going to move forward and how they're going to put talent around him to give him the biggest chance to succeed. So obviously he fired that off as a warning to the organization that they need to do something. And now it is incumbent on the general manager, the ownership group, the coach, whoever it is they hire, to do these things. And now you may have heard different things. I'll be interested to hear what your names are. But the names that I have heard linked to the Bucks job are Ettore Messina, Budenholzer, Becky Hammon, and David Blatt. And then there were a couple more that I heard. Steve Clifford is one that I heard as well. I'm not sure how real that one is. But who in this group do you really like, Josh?
Yeah, so just to fill out the list, it was reported that Milwaukee had 10 names on their list, and so I think we only know of 8. So to add to your list, Monty Williams, who was the longtime coach of the Pelicans, and he's vice president of the Spurs right now, and then another Spurs assistant, James Borrego, has been reported to be on their list as well. And then Joe Prunty is still being given lip service as a candidate, although I'm pretty sure if he's hired back on, that Giannis should just go back to Greece because it's not worth it. So that would be too harsh, but I think it might be impossible to be too harsh. So I think that there's a good collection. I'm actually, as the Bucks beat writer, I'm working on kind of ranking the head coaching candidates for a piece. So I've been thinking through this, and I think that probably the best option for this team would be Mike Budenholzer. I think he has a track record of putting together good teams. A point that I believe Danny LaRue made the point on his podcast with Tim Bontemps, that Budenholzer has a track record of putting together a really good defensive teams without elite defensive rebounders. Because if you look at the future of this team, it's Giannis at the 4 and Thon Maker at the 5, and neither one of those guys are elite at cleaning up the glass. And so I think that forming a good defense around them is something Budenholzer's already showed he can do. And he also has a great track record developing wing talent. And I think there's a lot of players on this team, from Tony Snell to Sterling Brown, who have a lot of potential if they can be utilized in the right way. And so I think that he's probably the candidate that stands out the most. I also love the idea of Monty Williams. I think that if you look at coaches who create a culture, I think he's really good at that. And I think not only the players love him, he's really good at interacting with ownership. I think he could be a good kind of mediating piece there that could kind of calm down all parties and get everybody moving in the right direction. And I think he just is a really high character guy. And then to comment on probably the most standout name is Becky Hammon. They actually interviewed her last summer for their general manager position, even though she has no experience there. They obviously like her. I think this ownership group, if you just look at this list of candidates, they obviously are open to diversity in their hire. I mean, Monty Williams is minority. Ettore Messina is not American. I think that you have variety there. You look at past coaches they've had as well. So I think there's definitely something to be commended there, that they're trying to cast a wide net and look at people from a lot of different backgrounds. And Becky Hammon obviously is going to have a unique perspectives, playing in the WNBA and then playing overseas, and now being an assistant coach for Pop. And so I think there are things to like about that. But I think what's interesting is that people tend to have really polarizing opinions on Becky Hammon. They either think that she's a terrible choice because she doesn't have the experience other guys have and she hasn't, put in the time yet, or they think it's awesome because she'd be the first woman coach. I don't think we have any idea how good Becky Hammon would be as a coach. And we probably have to trust on interviews, because there's a lot of guys that we don't know how good they're going to be. Like, do we know Igor Kokoshkov is going to be an excellent coach because Donovan Mitchell and Joe Ingles were good this year and he led Slovenia to Eurobasket title? No, we don't have any idea. We don't know how good a guy like James Borrego will be, or some of these others. Is Jerry Stackhouse going to be a good candidate? He seems to kind of be in the inside track for the Charlotte or Atlanta jobs. But we don't know. All he did was coach a G League team after being in the league. So I think we don't know how good these coaching candidates are going to be in a lot of cases. I think Becky Hammon is kind of the pinnacle of that, where we don't know even how good she'd be, running an NBA team because she has so little time logged with the NBA. But I think that there's potential there, and everybody that interacts with her thinks very highly. So I don't think that she would be a poor choice. I just think that the Bucks will have to properly vet whether she's able to do that job well. And that's not trying to put her down because she's a woman. It's just because she's a relative unknown. And so it's going to take a lot of research and a lot of time and interviews to determine whether that is something she could excel at.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Josh, we have gone for an hour and a half on basketball, and that seems like enough for today. But anything you want to get a plug in for before we're done?
Sure. So today's a busy writing day for me. So probably tomorrow I'll have the Milwaukee Bucks ranking their head coaching candidates over on Hoops Habit. And then here on the 94 Feet Report, I'm working on a piece that I have tentatively titled "The NBA Playoffs: Everything We Thought We Knew Is Wrong." And so,
okay.
So that should highlight basically we come into the playoffs and our experiences and thoughts. We kind of know what we think is going to happen, and then we really shouldn't have trusted our instincts at all. And I think those playoffs are kind of showing how unpredictable basketball really is. So I'm going to kind of highlight some of the ways that's happened. So look for that to drop probably tomorrow as well.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I'm sure, as I've said many times when you were on the show, that this will not be the last time we have you on. There's still a lot more basketball to talk about as we get into the conference finals, into the NBA finals. So I'm sure we'll be checking back with you, man. But it's always a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and always enjoy being on it. And I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of rooting for some of these series to stretch out a little bit. I don't want to cut our basketball season too short.
I don't agree with you on one particular series, but on the other three, I hope that you're correct. I would just like to see this Celtics-Sixers series be over. And I think that it's universally true of all Celtics series. I want them all to end in 4 games as a Celtics fan. But I don't want basketball to end prematurely, particularly as we head into the conference finals and the finals, because then we've got nothing. I mean, not nothing. We have the draft and we have free agency because the league never sleeps. But it definitely cuts short the fun that we're going to have this summer. So anyway, Josh, appreciate you coming on board, man, talking to us about a little bit of everything, and we're going to talk to you soon, okay?
Sounds good.